Good morning, everybody. Ron, happy birthday to you. It's good to see everybody. Today is many things, including Juneteenth. And what I wanted to do today is take a moment and connect Torah to a moment of American history. And this parsha lines up quite well, though not identically. And in fact, that is where I wanted to begin. Often, when we are well-intentioned and not as informed, we think that our experience lines us up to understand completely someone else's. You ever go to someone who's in pain and just sit with them? Let them talk? Well, that's one way of doing things. Another way sometimes, and it's sweet, even though it's clumsy and it doesn't come out well, is when someone pays a Shiva visit, sits down and says, I completely understand. And the truth is, you don't. No one can. To understand someone else's experience, you really just have to be them. As it says in Pirkei Avot, Al tadin et chavercha ad shetagia limkomo. Don't judge someone until you sit in their place, till you stand in their place. Another way of saying that is the Native American proverb, until you walk in their moccasins for a mile. No one can understand someone else. It's not they. Deborah, I see what you're saying, but there is no they. We're all one big us, but our differentiated experiences are based on being different people. There's a spectrum when it comes to this kind of thinking, which is why we go from sympathy, I'm sorry for you, to empathy, which is, I want to see if I can understand the world through your eyes. And then there's solidarity, which is, I can't understand the world through your eyes, but I commit myself to walking with you, not in front, and not even necessarily behind, but next to you, honoring you as a separate other who has their own story to tell. This is very, very important. And so for us to be able to make the journey in solidarity with a community in the United States, certainly, that has experienced a very different kind of enslavement than the Jewish language of enslavement. Now, there are Jewish people of color. The combination of identities gives them an even more varied perspective that I can't truly understand from the inside. But we can be together and tell our stories, which is what holidays always encourage us to do. Just a few years ago, President Biden declared Juneteenth a national holiday, a federal holiday that comes along with all of the honor that any other federal holiday has. Let's connect it to this parsha and then explore a little bit about Juneteenth and then a little bit about how this parsha and Juneteenth can talk to each other. That doesn't mean that the Torah can define Juneteenth, nor that Juneteenth tells us how to interpret the Torah, but they talk to each other, which is ultimately the goal that any two people or two groups should have. To hear each other, to listen to each other. Not the same as when you go to a Shiva house, but listening is such an important part of friendship, of partnership. If the people who say that they're my friends don't listen when I'm in pain, well, maybe they're not really friends. And just to say a word about that, it is the experience of many in the Jewish community over the last 257 days since October 7th, that we, many of us, not all of us, have had to recalibrate ourselves with regards to our belonging. How heard do we get to be? How much dignity does our society, our neighbor, our friends show us in understanding? If they don't give us space to speak our truths, then it's not friendship. Not yet. Maybe it's transactional allyship, which means as long as I'm useful to you, you'll be useful to me. There's benefit to that, but it isn't friendship. How can we show up not just as allies, but as friends in recognition of Juneteenth? Well, we must recognize lessons that we are called to learn as Jews. One of them is that in this week's Torah portion, Behaalotecha, we Jews, Israelites at the time, complain. That's not news. If you've ever served as a leader in a Jewish community, if you've ever served food, if you've ever had a real experience, we're good at kvetching. There's a great book called Born to Kvetch, if you want to read it. It's very interesting. It's more about Yiddish than it is about complaining, but it's good. Our ancestors complain because in the desert, the food that we have, the food that we have is very limited. Now, it's miraculous. It's manna, it's quail that falls from heaven, it's water that somehow finds us in the desert. But it's a complicated thing. It's a very, very complicated thing because the complaining makes sense, and yet we receive so much. A posture of abundance would allow us to just be grateful that we're in the desert and we're not alone, that God cares enough to take care of us, that our enslavement is over. But in fact, the complaining takes a very specific form. And when we complain, we say, we had cucumbers and fish when we were in Egypt. Yes, we did, because we were enslaved. Would you prefer enslavement? Of course not. Of course not. But it tells us that the process of liberation has at least two parts. One of them is a physical change, an external change. Yesterday we talked about the difference between technical change and adaptive change, technical leadership and adaptive leadership. Technical leadership is when there's a problem and you can fix it. Adaptive leadership is when I am part of the problem. And when I am part of the problem, I have to do some changing on the inside in order to achieve that big goal of change. The Israelites are just like this. The technical fix is the miracles, redemption, the sea splitting, being out from enslavement. But then what makes things more complicated is that enslavement has become internalized. It's become part of our ancestors' identity. And the idea that they are free is something that takes a long time to achieve. Enslavement follows on the inside. Freedom at least has two steps. And so when we look very closely at what today recognizes in American history, which is the unfinished process of liberation, the end of enslavement for Black people at the hands of America, we have to recognize what Juneteenth means, which is that the Emancipation Proclamation signed by President Lincoln, it was signed in 1863. What does Juneteenth recognize? It recognizes that it took 2.5 years until June 19th, 1865, for the word of this, for the word of emancipation, to reach the community in Texas. It was on June 19th, 1865, that Union troops, led by, I'm looking for the name to get it right, Major General Gordon Granger, who arrived in Galveston, Texas, to tell the community that slavery was illegal, that slavery was over. 2.5 years. Now, America perpetuated the problem, and we are all implicated, whether our ancestors lived here or didn't. We are all implicated with that darkness in American history. Because as Bryan Stevenson, the great civil rights leader who founded the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama, teaches, here we are, friends, and we are witness that slavery didn't end, it adapted. It evolved. It evolved into things like Jim Crow. It evolved into the new Jim Crow. It evolved into redlining. It evolved into countless structural things put into place. Why am I sharing this here? Number one, it's Juneteenth. This is a day of celebration. But celebrations often carry the memory. Something wasn't right, and then it became right. Think about Jewish holidays. Purim wasn't good. Then it became a little bit better. Pesach wasn't good. Became a little bit better. Historical holidays always talk about how things got better from a place that wasn't good. Juneteenth is a process, not just an episode. And we are called, we are implicated, not only as Americans, but as human beings, to be part of this. We are called to tell the history, to read the Torah, to understand the conversation that can be possible when we listen. Because only by truly listening, by allowing ourselves to be implicated, by going on that journey from sympathy to empathy to solidarity, can we be part of the healing that is necessary. And I mean that for the Jewish community, I mean that for the Black community, I mean that for the human community, because ultimately the goal is to be friends. The goal is to be friends. And so I bless us. I bless us to pay good attention. How well are we listening? How well do we listen to our own internalized trauma? How well do we listen to the journey to freedom? How closely have we read our own history? Here we are. Here we are, friends, called to be friends, called to try. In these 257 days since October 7th, speaking very honestly and very personally, it's been hard to be open to the pain of others. It has. I am deeply focused. Our community must remain deeply focused on our own healing, because the world is not listening. It isn't. It's important for us to understand the internal conversation we must continue to have as a people. Watch the protests that have been overwhelming in Israel for the last 2 nights, calling for change within Israeli society. And to stand heart to heart with our sisters and brothers is in part due to the fact that we share the journey of our history. How true that must remain in our souls, and what lessons we must learn from our attunement to our own history. Every group of humanity has had our own history. Can we listen well enough to be friends? Can we expect, should we expect, and I think we should, to be heard when we are hurting? Friendship will truly happen. Please God, may it be soon. When we can sit side by side with people who do not share our direct experience and feel heard, see the dignity they afford us with their eyes, words, and deeds. And even before that day comes, important to remember that we are called to offer that love, to offer that dignity. We're not called only to offer it when we receive it. We're called to offer it. We stand in solidarity. That's what it is to be a Jew. We stand in solidarity. UJA's mission is just a terrific embodiment of that. The commitment to taking care of people of all kinds. That's what it is to be a Jew. I said, with pain last night, while teaching the group, I said, if only they'd leave us alone, we would be the big helpers we want to be in the world. Well, we're called to be helpers anyway. We're called not to wait for the invitation to be good. Aviva Siegel is the name of someone whose face I will never forget. She spoke to our community, to the Jewish community, just 2 weeks ago. She was a hostage for 54 days held by Hamas, stolen from her home on October 7th. And she was a hostage for 54 days. Her husband, Keith, is still a hostage. And Aviva said to the media, to the community, she said, despite it all, I will be a good person. I will care. Well, that's Torah today. To stand with a memory of our Parsha, where the Jews could have just complained. Makes sense. Just complain. It's not good. Nicht geht. In our world right now, we have a lot to complain about. But that's not what we're called to do. We stand united, we stand determined, we stand with strength, we stand with resilience, we stand in prayer, we stand in pain, we march, we sing, we lobby, we give. All of these things. But we're also bigger than that. We're bigger than all of that. All of that has to be done. We have to be all of that. But that's not all we are. We're also called to be helpers, to be friends, to be good. Please God, one day, may we find real friendship in the world. And until that day where we feel it coming our way as consistently, as deeply as it should, Until that day, let's still give the world our love. That's always been a command. It's always been our calling. There will always be something to complain about. The world will always be imperfect until that great day. But for right now, in our imperfect world, we're called to raise it up just a little bit, to light a light, to give what we can, to be helpers. There's beauty in that, isn't there? Beauty. Last thing I'll say before we sing Hatikva is hello to my son Moshe. It's good to see you, my love. Here we go. Let's take a breath. Let's make sure in this moment to dedicate ourselves to helping build a beloved community. We are called to do that. Regardless of circumstance, we are always called to do that. May we be blessed to be part of great repair, to be helpers. And one day, may we be blessed to feel that in return too. Let's send our hearts to the east. Say with me before we sing, bring them home now. Thinking about Keith's face right now. Whose face do you see? Kol hod balevav pnima nefesh Yehudi homia ulefatei mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia on lo avda tikvatenu hatikva bat shnot alpayim liot am choshi be'artzenu eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim liot am chofshi be'artzenu eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim. Bring them home now. Bring them home now. Am Yisrael Chai. See you tomorrow, friends.